I have seen that.
So, good afternoon, dear participants. I'm sure the morning and afternoon session was wonderful for you, and this will be. So, let me welcome Dr. Amit Mukharjee, sir, on behalf of department and on behalf of ATAL to this particular session of 4th day of FDP. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Amit Mukharjee, sir. He is assistant professor in School of Conflict and Security Studies in National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. He pursued his postdoctoral fellowship from National Security Study Center, University of Haifa, Israel, where he was a fellow. He was also an Israel Asia Leaders Fellow in 2014 with Israel Asia Center, Jerusalem, Israel. Amit Mukherjee was a visiting fellow in IDSA, New Delhi. He has a PhD on GIS for India's defense from University of Pune and has received technical training from various national and international institutions, including NRSC Hyderabad, IIT Chennai, IITB, and CSAG Bangalore. He was nominated as a member of DST STIP 2020 thematic group for strategic technologies for India's STIP policy 2020, where he contributed in ideation of national GIS repository for strategic requirements. He has been engaged in outreach activity, including training in GIS for national security, and was an adjunct faculty in Department of Defense, NMU University. He has been a member of several boards that includes Board of Advisor Conflict Report, Heidelberg Institute of International Conflict and Security Studies, Germany, Indian National Cartographer Association, member of Editorial Review Board, Electronic Journal of Social and Strategic Studies. His teaching activity includes very nice titles like Theory of War, Terrorism and Unconventional War, Disaster Management, Biological and Chemical War, and many other topics which is related with the security studies. Today, he will going to share his views on communication and soft skill, foundation and principle. Now, I request Amit Mukherjee, sir, to please take the charge of the session and enlighten us on the same topic. Over to you, Amit, sir.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Very privileged to be giving this lecture under the AICTE ATAL scheme. Last year, I had the privilege of giving the same, a similar talk on the same subject under the UGC scheme. So I'm very grateful for the host to have invited me to give this thing. Everything I'm going to speak is going to be or going to appear to be very mundane, common, and even sometimes unwarranted, because the nature of soft skills and communications is something that we all practice on a day-to-day basis, on a daily regular basis in our workplace, in our social space, and sometimes it might just appear that these are certain things that we already know or that we already probably converge and cover in day-to-day activities. So my challenge would be to present it in such a way that I can keep the interest of the audience here, all of you, I'm sure, much better at this at several levels, but to also be able to invoke or garner some kind of an interest from all of you to hone the skills that we all practice, and we are at different levels of how we implement our communication and soft skills in our day-to-day life, so that we can all just improve towards meeting the goals of or objectives that we have, whether they are short-term or long-term as such. I'm still trying to learn the skills in many ways, and I still land into situations where my responses are not so proper or become jammed. And but I was lucky enough to go through a training program of the same when I was doing my postdoctoral studies in kind of what is known as a finishing school in Israel. and I think I should be able to share some of my experiences and some of the known, but let's treat it as a refresher for most of us who would probably be aware of these kind of elements in the following presentation. I've kept the presentation very simple. The presentation is only a guide to the direction that we want to go in, but most of the things I'd rather cover with my thoughts, my experiences, and what I understand on the topic at hand. Just a second, I'm just trying to, yeah. So effective communication skills. Several elements make for a good communication skill. It is extremely essential to us for our, like I mentioned, day-to-day activities, and to be able to meet the objectives that we have, where the availability of those objectives or the success in those objectives is based on people-to-people contact, your contact or my contact to other people concerned. So, of course, effective communication skills are essential, and effective communication needs to be developed. And some of us may have it already developed to a good extent or a great extent, but there's always something that is there within the curve that we can always improve upon. And there are some formal structures that kind of give us the direction of how we are able to, enhance it from whatever levels that we may be at. So some points I've divided today's talk into two parts. So the first part would, of course, be about the communication skills, and then we'll expand it into something known as soft skills, which converges or actually takes into account certain larger areas of skill sets as far as interaction between people to people is concerned. Within the confines of communication skills, what we will be aiming to refer or present today would be to define and understand how the process of communication takes place, or how the process of communication is intended to take place. I'll give some anecdotal experiences of how we have an objective at hand, and then we try to communicate the way we are supposed to, but then the communication does not take place the way it is supposed to happen. And that's where the lacunae comes in, that's where the shorting comes in, and then we are unable to see the desired results that we see. This happens everywhere all the time, and it will continue to happen all our life. Just that the course should be able to, or the talk should be able to give us a little more focus on how we are supposed to engage our colleagues, our seniors, our workspace people, and our social space people, so as to be able to come up very amiable and in a way that is very pleasant, and that kind of sticks with the impression that people have on others, either through the first meeting or through a continued association. So that's the whole objective of how we tend to understand, define the process of communication and by itself and through other means. And we shall also see what are the measures that kind of inhibit ourselves in the way we are supposed to express ourselves, or the intent to express ourselves, and what are the barriers in this process that kind of keep us from being able to meet our objectives in making a proper communication. We'll also just see what what are the elements that add to the practice of active listening, and then of course end this first part of the talk with some tips to improve verbal and non-verbal communication. I'm not sure whether we are going to have time to discuss, because I have kept the time limit in such a way that most of it will be covered during the tenure that we have. But of course, feel free to connect back through the host institution or directly. If there is any query, you can also, of course, stop me when I'm talking and ask, or at the end of the presentation. So some very elementary, basic, common components of how do we communicate. We have the spoken word, we have the written script, we have visual images, and then we have body language. Something very essential that we all know, but I will still reiterate it in kind of my point, is that the only thing that makes us differ from other species on this planet is that we have been able to channelize our communication through words. There are other species who are also able to communicate, but these are mostly more elementary and basic sounds or other, body language, etc. So primate species do communicate with each other. There are, if you take basically most animals which have evolved beyond the cellular single or multicellular kind of structure, you'll see that there is a form of communication that everybody has. But what differentiates us is that the way we use words and the details in which we are able to express using those words, that makes us at the top of the chain of evolution. And that's why the spoken word is the first line of communication, and how you use those words will then be able to decide whether you are able to express yourselves in the way that you are best ideated to do so. Second, of course, when there's a spoken word, there is a huge history of how the spoken word got translated into written scripts. So whatever we speak, there is a distinction now. I mean, contemporarily speaking, as of now, while we are, I am giving and the part, I mean, you are listening. We know that there is a big difference between how we speak and actually how we write. That also differs at times when we actually try to um, write different kinds of objectives that we have. Very common, something very elementary, but I'll still request your patience for me to allow me to actually go through it so that I can make a larger point at the end of towards the end of the presentation as such. We learn to write in very formal ways, especially within our country, with regards to how we write an application, how we write a letter, which is personal or unofficial, how we write to different kind of bodies when we are applying, etc. So there is this common distinction all of us share, or all of us are aware of, that this kind of style that we use for written word is very different the way we probably speak. Even the speech that we have has so much variation when we speak to our friends and family members compared to when we speak to officials or our seniors or other colleagues, etc. Different unknown people. So the whole expression of how you respond to that gets expressed in these spoken word, and of course in written transactions in the written word. The third most important thing is visual images and body language. Of course, visual images is what we are referring to, is the kind of presentations that we make, the one that is already going on the screen right now. But this is more to do with how you even use images while you are teaching. So this is not something, or while you're presenting, I mean, making a case, making a point, etc. during the course of the activities that we do. Since this is for faculty, I am assuming everybody in the audience is a faculty, so their main task or main job is teaching. So how you present an idea, how you present a concept, how you present a thought with the aid of visual images is also a very strong element of how you want to express and what is the details that you express, and also the nature of the expression itself. So a same image or sorry, a same thought or a same topic, when it is expressed in different varied ways, will carry very different kind of messages. I don't want to get into anything which is, say, controversial or takes us away from the point at hand in this discussion. But we have already seen so many examples where certain kind of visual images, whether we're talking about movies, whether we're talking about television content, whether we're talking about some news article that comes, that kind of evokes different kind of emotions from north to south, east to west, and even internationally. So the line which says a picture is worth 1,000 words is not just a very popular quote, but it kind of is able to, at what level and at what instance and at what kind of image will evoke what kind of response may differ from people to people, individual to individual. But the fact remains that it is an important and almost inalienable mode of communication that we use. And the final one is, of course, body language, which then sums up the whole expression, your thought process, your approach, your intensity, your sincerity, your aim, objective, etc. Everything that you get into that communication then gets expressed with the body language. So then it's with the combination of the spoken word, with the combination of the written word, with the combination of the visual images that you present, and with, of course, the body language. They are differently targeted for different objectives, but in the whole way, these are the four elementary or four elements of how we make basic communication possible. So what is communication? In very simplest terms, it's the transmission of an idea or thought or feeling, so that there is a sender who sends it and there is a receiver who receives it. But here is the challenge. The receiver should be able to receive what has been communicated in its exactness, rather than just an abstraction of what the sender has tried to communicate. Most of our life has experiences and examples, and while I'm speaking to the audience, also, I just hope that I come near to the objective of what I'm trying to communicate and what the audience is able to receive from it, almost meets the culmination point for both things. But I'll be happy even if I'm able to do so at a great extent or a large percentage, nearing the culmination kind of, or the end, or the intended objective as such. So the problem here happens is most of the times, and I don't want to throw statistics in it, but if you Google, you'll also find statistics about these kind of things under psychology and people psychology and social space psychology and other branches where people to people communication is discussed, that a significant amount of misunderstanding goes not intended but unintended. The word itself, misunderstanding, kind of explains it. So I'll break it down to its more subservient kind of expression. So I'd say something like most understanding that lead to misunderstanding also happens because there is miscommunication. So I began by misunderstanding, but now I'm putting the blame in the miscommunication. That means both the party that sends the message or communication and the party that receives are party to this miscommunication that happens. When the misunderstanding occurs, it is always usually the recipient or the receiver who does not understand the intended message. But by modern or by contemporary explanation, in a communication, there are two identities. One is the person who is transmitting the communication, one who is receiving it, and hence both are integral to the transmission and the reception of the intended message. The transmitter cannot say, the person who's sending the message cannot say, I said this, and this is what was intended, but the receiver did not understand, and this is what he or she took home as an expression, and that does not dissolve or remove the responsibility of the person who's actually communicating. So this becomes a tied engagement between the sender and the receiver, or I'm sorry, there is this message that keeps propping up. Please, I request the host to see what can be done about it. Should I press approve? Am I audible? Is there anybody on in? Okay. All right. I'm sorry, I'm having to decline this message that is coming up on the screen. Please tell Dr. Prabhakaran that I would not be able to approve it, because the moment I approve it, I'll lose control of the presentation slide itself. Please, one of you could request Dr. Prabhakaran not to present the annotation screen as such. So communication is not a mysterious process. It takes place when ideas from your mind are transferred to another, and they arrive intact, complete, and coherent. So same thing that I already said is that unless you have communicated what you intended to do in the first place and the exactness of the intended meaning and content, then we do not have we do not have a successful process of communication that needs to take place. What are the main challenges of communication as such? Well, there are barriers. Now, let me, we'll of course come to the details of what these kind of barriers are in a future slide. But just to give you an idea how a simple communication process can be viewed. There is the sender, who is the transmitter of the communication, who actually sends the message. There is the medium, which is our language, which is verbal or written in script form, or a video, or our body language for the matter of discussion. So these are the elements which already occur. And then, of course, there is the receiver. The receiver is then the person who is receiving the message. He decodes it according to his experience. And now here is the challenge, and here is the barrier that we are referring to. The receiver receives the message and then processes it. This processing is where the confusion or the shortcoming or the lacunae of why the message was not delivered properly to the receiving end, it comes into play. That has various criteria and various, how do you say, aspects because of which these things might happen. The receiver may not be from your own country and does not understand your language that well. So you use the language you thought was proper, and you use the proper words in your own language, English or not, anything. But the person who understands the language completely or in broken words did not get the underlying message, or did not understand the tone. We spoke about how verbal communication happens, and we'll be covering it in a little more detail. But just to make a point, verbal communication through words is not the only end game, or the end result of what we intend to do as far as communications go. Most of these things that happen in communication also require us to articulate the words in a way that express our intended meaning absolutely properly. When we do that through vocal or verbal system, we are actually using a lot of what you call aspect of body language, but through the voice. So there is something called voice intonation. All right. So voice intonation is basically the use of the tone in such fluctuating manner that you're able to emphasize certain things in a sentence or in a paragraph or in a part of a speech where you are wanting to make the presentation more fluid or more friendly to the ear. Otherwise, it is classified as something what we refer to as monotonic. Now, monotone is something where the tones will not change. So, for example, I can speak for the next 10 seconds in a monotone, which can say the communication process is a medium where the receiver receives the code, the feedback and response process happens, and the end sender sends the message, and then there are barriers about the same. So I spoke in a flat tone, which basically makes the whole conversation very, very boring after a little time. However, the intention of, or the aim of intonation or using tone is not for what you call making a communication interesting, but it is more to do with how you properly want to emphasize certain points that you intend to do so about. So that is one of the things which is missing. If it is missing in the receiver, then you are unable to identify what is the intended message or what is the intention of the communication that is taking place. And of course, then there is a feedback response loop which goes to the sender. Once this loop starts to function, we are in a communication process. The idea is to make communication process so fluent that the barriers over time should be able to dissolve or should be reduced, so that this communication happens more fluently. Now, that is something which usually takes time, but if you use certain tools and tricks and tips that exist, and probably most of us do that, then in that case, the barriers drop off or reduce in lesser amount of time. To have a perfect communication between two people or one speaker and a group, or between two groups at the first time in the perfect way is also possible, and it happens most of the time, but it is still something which is in very many ways an aspiration that we all try to do, and in time with practice, it does happen. Very simple, like I was explaining. We have one-way communication, we have two-way communication, we have one-to-many. This is the example that I was trying to make, that a communication process, the way it is intended, we define it in very simple terms, one-way, two-way, and one-to-many or many-to-many. There's another one that is missing here, is many-to-many, but then many-to-many is more noise and chaos, and it doesn't there is nothing that you can actually take out of it as content is concerned, as far as communications go. Two-way communication is again conversation, and two-way communication is probably a speech. Or what I'm doing right now is that I'm delivering the talk, and the others are receiving. So I mentioned already the processes: verbal, vocal, and non-verbal communication. We'll cover this a little more in detail as to what is proper in verbal communication, what is vocal, and what is non-verbal communication. But mostly it is to deal with how you are intending to use your words. Verbal communication is more of a formal structure, and this is usually used to, express an idea, a thought, or when you're taking a class. Vocal communication is mostly when you are in an informal conversation, and you are not subject to any kind of stringent formal patterns, parameters of how one delivers lectures, etc. And then, of course, nonverbal communication is all about the body language and things leading thereon. So, what are the features for effective communication? Active listening, eye contact, posture, language, and questioning skills. Now, active listening, we will go to an extended slice which says there is a difference between what you hear and what you listen. So the main difference between hearing and listening is that, is that when you are in the process of listening, you are also processing the information. You are actively thinking about it, coming to conclusions or assumptions, or already intending to query or ask a question about. This is what is actually listening, but the moment you get immersed into the subject being discussed, that means there has to be a response that that entails the process of listening. You're not just listening intently, which you are already doing, but you're also trying to process what part of this aspect can be used now or in the future about anything that interests you or you are connected to. Eye contact is extremely important. Posture is completely important. Eye contact actually tells you the intent. It also shows your sincerity in how you're able to, or why you're engaging in a particular contact. Missing eye contact is usually used in very informal talks, etc. Posture, simple language, and questioning skills are all something very similar, very common, but they are not used intently when we try to do it, because we don't generally practice. And for most part of the discussion that we do, including in our homes and in other places, work included, we are very informal, and we become very comfortable. And as such, we do not pay attention to these kind of mundane, common things like posture and simple language and questioning skills and eye contact, etc. Because we are surrounded by people we know very well. These are people who are our friends, or these are people who we have been working with for 10, 15 years. But trust me, this is how it starts. What I'm not asking everybody in the audience to suddenly become a very uptight, very overtly conscious person, 24 hours 7, follow these rules. No, what I'm trying to convey here is that irrespective of whom with you are conversing, whether it's home, it's your social circle, it's your work circle, certain things are will give you more desirable results when you are trying to converse when you're trying to communicate. And if you make it a practice, it will not be, if you're already doing it, fine, very good. On the screen, it looks funny. How am I supposed to behave with a friend just the way I behave with my boss, or I behave with a senior, or I behave with a dignitary? The practice is something which, if at all the audience here who's listening is keen to test, or if you are willing to practice it. If you're doing it, fine. If not, if you just want to give it a try, give it a week or give it 2 weeks of try and see the difference in the response that you get in your social circle, in your work circles mostly. When I say social, I basically mean the work environment, working environment as such. So this is not just about being stiff or being very formal with the best friend while you are dining out or whether you're hanging out, etc. This is all about bringing your own system of thinking, expressing that thought, and communicating and conversing, along with keeping your body language in the proper way while you are doing the act of communication, irrespective. Of course, when you're going to talk to a child, this is going to differ. When you talk to a senior, this is going to differ. But the intent, the sincerity, and these skills, certain things like the eye contact, etc., are extremely essential. They sound mundane, they sound very something which probably is being done with everybody, but if you can, if you can just evaluate your day-to-day habits while conversing, while communicating, and if you find yourself missing, sometimes you are reluctant to speak to somebody, sometimes there are other issues which are involved, and in such cases, if you find yourself avoiding eye contact, etc., then there are other connotations to how you're supposed to communicate with that person, or whether you actually want to even communicate or converse with such a person, etc. So those other issues then get involved or highlighted within your social circle, etc. To avoid all those things, these are some of the important points which will actually help you or assist you in achieving what you want to achieve, even if it's something which you don't want to engage with or communicate with an individual or otherwise with. But that is something, these 4 or 5 points are something, if you just practice it, and not just in any formal environment, but even informal environment, you will find that there is a huge difference. As an experiment, I can request all of you to actually try and it is just 5 points. You get questioning skills if there is nothing to query about. But other 4 points, whether it's about active listening, whether it's about maintaining an eye contact, whether it's having a posture, and we'll see what posture matters. There are some diagrams, some effective indicators about how the posture should be. And if you use very simple language, then and then you experiment it in your social circle, and that's how we were made to practice. And I can say with a certain degree of confidence that if you're already doing it, fine, excellent, nothing like it. But if those who are doing it to a certain stage or certain level, but not doing it all along, kindly update it to this, that every conversation that you have with your colleagues, with your faculty, with your social space and workspace, if you just follow the 4 steps, and there is going to be a significant improvement in the kind of effect that kind of a communication skill uses. Well, some of the benefits, of course, is that problem solving becomes easier when there is an argument that is going on. Now, this is all innately related to the psychology of how human behavior is affected when some of these skills are used. People who have been writing this or been talking about these kind of skills like maintain eye contact, etc., have over the years, over the decades, practiced certain social skills based on which these kind of ideas are being promulgated or promoted. So it helps in what you call in solving interpersonal problems, or for that matter, any problem which may not be interpersonal, but may have between a group of people or your administration or your some other office or body. So if there is a direct link between how this kind of use of proper communication skill sets, no matter how basic and elementary they may seem, will have a direct effect on how you actually are able to solve problems. And when we see problems, I'm talking about the day-to-day mundane problems that happens in offices all around us. which happens within the administrative circle, with administrative cycle circle, etc. Decision making better improves because when there is a lack of conflict due to these kind of things where the conflict arises because miscommunication occurs or misunderstanding occurs, we have already said that the blame doesn't lie on one and the other. It's tied into both the sender and the receiver. Then in such cases, decision making improves, workflow improves, and of course, professional image and other things also improve. If you see on the diagram on the right hand side, there are benefits of effective. Of course, I've taken it from a business communication model, but you can apply this. And the business here is not about the corporate industry. The business basically translates into any work that we are all engaged in. So the most important point is on the left hand side. If you see the green, which is lesson misunderstanding, that's where I started my talk with. The proper communication often, all the time, needs to address any amount of misunderstanding or any amount of miscommunication. If both of these things happen, then of course results are ensured as such. What are the barriers? We talked about barriers in communication. We saw those barriers. I gave an example where I said that the barrier in communication is all about, I gave an example that supposing somebody comes to your country or your region and does not know the language, you may think that, okay, I spoke in very simple words. I spoke in common language, say if it's Hindi or English or whatever, but the person who is receiving it did not understand because when you said something, it had a local connotation. Local connotations exist every place, every location on the planet, and it has basically its connections with what is said, but what it implies. So there are sentences, there are communicable sentences, communication sentences and structures of these sentences which differ even if spoken in in different in the same language in different places. So there is a geographical location based local connotation that exists while we use these kind of languages. When this happens, when this occurs, we have misunderstanding and miscommunication. So the noise factor is all about removing these kind of or filtering out these kind of issues so that the what is most essential can get across to your audience, etc. So noise is something where we are all used to, especially as Indians. And again, I'm starting by blaming myself, or I'm making myself responsible. I'm not saying everybody in the audience or the audience itself may be doing this, but by and large, within our country, within our society, we have the tendency to, because we love to talk. Okay, we love to express ourselves. Whether you are using a regional language, whether you're using a national language, or whether you're using common language, we love to express ourselves. Indians, by their culture, history, heritage, we are a very expressive nation. We are a very expressive society. So what happens is it translates into us using a lot of words compared to some other society I won't name, because then that would be a direct comparison as such. But that's how we are. We are very enthusiastic as people. So we talk, and when we talk, we kind of add more words, sometimes even slangs, which then makes the whole conversation and communication a collection of a lot of noise and a lot of words through a word. If the recipient is also from my location, he or she will understand, of course, because we are in the same geographical location. So whatever we say or whatever styles we use, whatever is intended, whatever is unintended, whatever is hidden within the message or within the lines, innuendos, shenanigans, all of that will be understood. But it becomes a challenge when there is a recipient, or for that matter, a sender. Sender means the person who's communicating, recipient is the person who's receiving or is listening to the talk. Either of which they do not have any connection to the local geographical place, then that local connotation that I'm referring to, that becomes a problem and an issue. It doesn't just exist in simple things like, a vegetable or some other item being called with two different names. It completely changes in a sentence or in a statement. A sentence or a statement which has a very positive connotation in one part of the country has a very negative or a different connotation in another part. So these are excellent as far as the local cultural connections are concerned. But when we are talking of communication across the whole spectrum, then this becomes an added, what you call added challenge to actually be able to properly. So I'll just give you a very simple example. I went to a place not important. Somebody said something, and I thought, that, okay, that person was using foul language or was intending to uh, pass on a communication which was not with respect. Then I had a person or a friend from the same place who told me that he's not intending to actually disrespect you or what you call insult you, but this is what he meant. So I had an active translator. Not that the language, the translator was translating the language because I spoke the same language, but that local geographical connotation of what that person was saying, I immediately understood that. And I understood that the person was not trying to insult or disrespect, but that style itself meant something very proper, but I was not used to the way that it was told to me. So it takes a time for you to get accustomed if the place is new, and this happens both nationally and, of course, much more in the international arena. So we are all mentally prepared when we do that, when we go, from one place to the other geographical location, from one geographical location to another geographical location. We all go there, but then if we all try to use the exact amount of words that we need to express ourselves with, then this problem of noise or additional information that becomes a challenge sometimes may not happen. There is also a positive a part of this story is that when you go to another place which is not your native place, and if it is far, far away geographically from your native place, and if the locals of that other place do realize that this is an outsider, their behavior and language becomes very different to as how they would communicate within themselves. So that's a very positive way of how noise is deliberately reduced while speaking to a foreigner. And when I say foreigner, I don't mean outside India. Even within India, when you're traveling from one state to the other, and if there are helpful locals in a location, and they identify they understand that this guy is from a different place or a different geographical background, and the way they connect or communicate is to make you comfortable and to make you help you in any inquiry that you may have. And I have had both kind of experiences. I'm sure that all of you have all got similar experiences, both good and bad. But the point I'm trying to make is that when such communication happens, when somebody is trying to connect with you and knows that you're not from the local place, then the local connotation of what I'm calling as noise, gets down. Noise should not be taken as anything negative. Noise is just additional understanding of the geographical, cultural aspects that are used in day-to-day communication or conversation, which may not be understood from a person or by a person who is coming from another place. Inappropriate medium. Don't shout on the streets when you're talking to a friend or a group of friends. You don't use loudspeakers while you're trying to meditate. It's just very, very simple, and I'm only going to make very few passes on this as an example. It's self-explanatory. Do not use something which can be done by just words. Do not use a written text. I have faced this problem immensely during my whatever little work life I've had, is that most things which could have been understood or which could have been dealt with just by words, I committed the error in giving it in writing. So, and vice versa, where it is required to be given in written, one must not use. I mean, these are all commonplace understanding. All of us know about it, but then these also create barriers. I'll give you a very personal anecdotal experience. I'm not very happy about it, but it's a learning experience in life. I was able to I was supposed to write something on an email to a colleague somewhere in some other workplace that I was in. And an email in that work culture, in that place, was supposed to be something of an offense, because the people thought that once the verbal communication had happened, why did this person again send something in an email in a written format? So it was taken, or it is taken in a way that the person does not trust your word. From my point of view, or from the person who sent the email, from their point of view, that person was just trying to get an official or a formal approval of a process. And when you, and this confusion happened because these are two countries, two cultures, or two different working what you call working habits, or working work understandings. Like I explained, one geographical location to another geographical location. The intent of the email, or the intent of giving it in writing, was not to challenge the other person's verbal approval. It took some time to understand that the verbal approvals in certain conditions are as strong as any written approvals that are received. But it takes time. It took me time to understand that that was how it is. Where I came from, or where I was coming from at the time, unless things are in written words, do not matter. So I was coming from a society which is a little more formal as far as approvals for certain things, administrative approvals for certain things go. And I was going to a place, or I was in a place where approvals can be in written, or if it's verbal, then verbal is also enough in most kind of things. I mean, there's no direct translation for in most, but then it took me time to understand. So medium, I just gave an example of how a medium which is proper can become improper and inappropriate at certain kinds of scenarios and situations. Assumptions and misconceptions, one of the most common reasons why barriers in communication happen. I understood this is what he wanted to, or she wanted to say. So that starts the whole game of assuming what the person wants to communicate, or what the person is intending to communicate, instead of actually directly asking or clarifying about the subject of the conversation or communication itself. So most of uh, our barriers that exist while we are communicating or while we are conversing happens because we assume that this is what the person might be wanting to tell. Then if something falls off or falls out, then you will have a huge amount of explanation and counter explanation. This is what I wanted to say. This is what I understood. I did not. It is not my mistake. It is not. And then you go into that whole corrective mechanism of who said what and who replied in which way. Emotions come into play. Like I said, I gave an example. I did not understand the tone and the language of the place that I was visiting. I needed a person from the same place to explain to me, because I was about to think, or I was thinking at the time, that the person who said something to me meant it in a very insulting, negative, derogatory kind of way. So emotions, had there not been any translator, or had there not been any person to explain that this is how it is spoken, this is not trying to denigrate your respect or anything as such, then I might have, emotions is not all about anger, or taking an offensive action, etc. It would just have left a bitter experience in my mind, and I would have been very disappointed at that, and that disappointment itself also becomes an emotion. This is while I am receiving. In the same way, if I am trying to converse or communicate with my audience where my emotions are very offensive, then also the audience will not be able to first, if I'm offensive, or if I'm expressing in a manner which shows, or in cases rage, then of course the audience will not be even interested to listen to what I'm trying to say here. At such a point, in such circumstances, emotions play as a very big spoiler for any kind of conversation or communication as such. I already gave you the example of language differences. There is hundreds of examples where this happens. We see it in all our cities and states, especially when, unfortunately, when foreign visitors come as tourists, etc. Our effort should be to see to it that if we are in a position to help communicate, converse, while they are having language barriers, etc., we should be able to assist. But that's more on the social front. For our own example of how best we can communicate or converse, it is always good to be aware of what is appropriate. So I've been very lucky. I've traveled in many states in our own country, and the first thing I try to find out when I go to a place for a longer period of time, I'm not talking about traveling, but even if you travel to a lot of places, you should be able to inquire, find out, read about certain cues and sentences and statements about how languages matter in any kind of conversation or communication, especially when you're giving a lecture or a talk, or you're gone for a meeting or a work meeting to a place which has a different language than yours. Cultural differences, of course. I just to give you an example of a work culture place where I come from, a very formal function or formal structure of work in certain administrative things, and I went to another place where the work culture was more informal. Then, of course, the misunderstanding that happened and the miscommunication that happened on my part was that I did not find out that emails are the last resort, or a written form of taking the permission or taking approval is one of the last resorts, and was only needed for something very, very, at an extreme official level where high officers of the government is involved, etc. In most cases, an informal phone call and a verbal communication usually works. So that was just a personal anecdotal experience that I thought I'll bring for cultural differences. Poor listening skills. All of us suffer from this, and I'm sorry if I'm taking all of you with me into this dire habit of poor listening skills. Most of the time, it is because we are not interested. If somehow we are able to, express, and also without offending anybody, delineate all the types of communications and conversations that we will partake, that we are interested in, and the ones that we are not interested in, we should avoid to partake. If we could do that in a black and white system, this problem wouldn't exist. Unfortunately, in life, we cannot choose all the kinds of communications and conversations based on only things that we like. So I hope some of you, if not all, are finding whatever I am saying today or what I'm going to say tomorrow a little bit of interest. But if it's not up to a particular, degree of interest, most of the things I'm saying are just passing words. I can just test you now. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of a format for today's talk. But if I were just, this is what I do in my class. There are classes that I teach which are extremely interesting because they have practicals in it. And then I'm bringing my own anecdotal and personal experience here. And then there is, of course, there are classes where things are not always that interesting. But one way to keep the mind of the people or the audience that is listening is that I can't do this here. This is you're all just like I am a guest, you're all guests here. But that is one way of keeping the mind alert, and also of making the class a little more interesting, because eventually whatever I teach is led towards the practicals. And I'm again personalizing my example here very much just to make the point that usually we tune out when we do not, when we lack interest in the subject that we are trying to attend, or we are trying to be involved. So, but that then results into what is written here as poor listening skills. And poor listening skills basically means that your mind is not active, you do not hear what is being said. I mean, you do not process what is being said. Some words you catch because your ears are working physically, biologically, and so whatever your words capture or whatever your minds capture, it does it in abstractions, and then it is not able to what you call process in the thing. I mean, there are so many examples of this thing, and we all go through this. Okay, so there is no way to actually do it other than your own willingness to do it. Just an example: you go to a course, you have 10 classes. Of course, 4 are going to be interesting, 4 not that interesting, and 2. But the point is that if you intend to make your attempt at listening to what the person is doing, then you are able to actually help yourself. None of the courses that we are actually running right now, or the hosts are running right now, is just for the sake of it. Most of this have a very grand objective, and the achievement of this objective, to the degree at which it is achieved, is all based on the people participating in it. As such, my request, and I can only request, is that when there are interesting classes, of course it's your own subject, you come from varied subjects, you're going to be very active, super active, etc. If the challenge is when the subject or the topic is not very interesting, how do you forget about the person who's giving the talk. He'll do his best, or she will try his best to make it interesting, because he or she is also aware of the challenges in the subject and the kind of wide variety of audience that may exist. He'll do his best, but the point is, if the listener or the receiver makes it a point that that person will be sincere in actually trying to receive as much. If that intent comes into play, and it should, when you are privileged enough to be actually going through a lot of different kinds of training programs, and this will continue all your life. You'll have mid-level, you'll have senior level, etc. classes all through your careers, etc. If you make it a point, this is all about attitude. So the whole thing of poor listening skills actually comes from the attitude. If the attitude is that we will only be interested in doing what we like, then of course there is nothing that can be done if you are not yourselves, designed. You've not designed your own mind and intent to actually force yourself to be active listeners while something that is not that interesting is also going on. So poor listening skills actually comes from that lack of interest rather than somebody's habit. And that can be explained in so many ways with practical examples. So the only thing I can actually only request in this particular point is that try to take as much as possible and try to implement as much as possible from something that may lack a direct interest or a direct liking, because eventually that will also assist and help in your own faculty development aims and objectives as such. Use of jargon, I already said. I use the word slangs. Pardon me for using that, but then jargons are something that are understood by a few. These are big words to explain simple, concepts. If my audience today has the habit of using simple words, kudos to you, very good. If like me, you have to go through a big learning curve, because I used to think using big words is something which will impress the audience. It always had an adverse effect. I'm talking from my personal experience here again, and I have had a lot of what you call not so positive responses when big words were supposed to be used. Okay, it's how you convey the message in very simple terms that lasts longer, rather than making an impression or trying to make an impression using big words, which may not be needed. So there was a time when these big words and everything were fad of the day, but now as things are getting more complicated, as things are I'm talking within the academic framework. Okay, we're also all faculties and everybody in the academic scenario. Our job is not to make a grand presentation and win claps or reverberating thunderous, what you call, applause. Our job, our role, our aim, our duty is all about conveying the subject matter that we want to convey to the intended audience that is there at hand. So that is only possible if we keep things simple. In any ways, some of you come from physics, some of you come from engineering, some of you come from biology, zoology. so many complex subjects. The subjects themselves are so complex. The language, I believe, should be that one of the reasons why language should be very simplistic. And the same practice should go into our common daily communication and conversations. All right, so this unintended or for some other reason has been a problem with very many people. I also included myself in that, and that the use of jargonic words or use of jargons and uh, bigger words or more impressive words. There is a place for that also, but not in most communications that we are intending to do here. And in our case, it is about from faculty to scholars or students that you may be teaching. So as such, this is something which we must always have in mind. And then, of course, communications should be direct and should not have distraction. Now, by distractions, I mean any kind of body language, any kind of hint, any kind of words that basically take away the intended meaning of the communication. It again seems very common. All of us start talking at a very young age when we are born, but then there is a huge amount of honing of skills which is required when we actually come into the work life, when we come into something so responsible that is in when we as faculty try to teach or convey our subject to the next level to the students and to the scholars, etc. So all of these, if you were to actually someday self-analyze, you'll see that there are almost indications of all these factors that we see on the screen that are there in our day-to-day communication that we may have. The point is we are so self-engrossed in how good or how self-achieved we are that we do not take into account that we may also be party to all of these barriers that we may be creating for our students and even society at large in the social space that we communicate and converse with. Now comes the important question: how does one go with this list every time you're talking? That doesn't seem natural, or that doesn't seem normal. Like you can't have a teacher or faculty who holds the list and says, okay, let me today, because I just did a ATAL course on proper communication, see whether I have noise in my communication. Of course, you're not supposed to, or you're not expected to do that, not with a list. But then if you are conscious, that if you know that some of these factors that are on the screen that you are getting them in the way you are communicating with, or supposing you are with the understanding that you're reaching 60% of the class but not 100%, it would be a good retrospective exercise for yourself to see where one of these points or which of these points are actually kind of barricading you or creating that barrier for you to reach from the 60% that you're so convinced that, okay, 60% of my class gets me what I'm talking, but I need to reach the remaining. So please, this is a self-analysis measure. See where and what applies to you. And if you're already at the 100%, then of course, that's something even I would like to imbibe and learn from you guys. But that is some of the points which are most important elements of what is considered as barriers. Something which appears, and again, I keep repeating this statement, and I'll keep repeating it all through the talk today, is that something which appears very normal, very mundane, very common. What is there to talk about? I mean, what is there to even enlist this? Actually, is a very important portion or point of how you are communicating above and below your rank and role that you play in the workplace. A small passing, I already mentioned this difference between listening and hearing. Of course, hearing is a physical process, listening is all physical, but also mental active process. We've already covered this in a previous slide. I already told you, when you listen, it's not just sound. It's a meaning, it's an explanation, it's your processing. You would like to ask 10 questions, please go ahead if you want. If there are no questions, don't that doesn't matter as long as you understand what is being conveyed. Hearing is just noise, just sound. Okay, so practice listening rather than and just hearing most of the time. I again told you this is all related to how your interest plays into. Okay, this is not just a physical or a biological phenomenon. It's an extremely mental activity that we are talking about here. The only way you can change from the process of hearing to listening is that if you will it. Okay, I can show an exciting movie here of whichever guy you like, Amitabh Bachchan, Shah Rukh Khan, etc., and then most of the audience might just get active based on the assumption that most of you like movies or films. But then when you're listening to something or hearing something which is as common pass as soft skills or communication skills as we're covering right now, then your intent to be able to change or switch your mind from a simple hearing process to listening is extremely important. How does that change into active listening? Is basically you interpret or you understand not just the words, but what is the message behind the words. That is the way you evaluate what is being said, why it is being said, what is the benefit of what is being said, and then your mind responds to it. You don't respond to me here, but then your mind responds to it based on its utility and where you would like to, use whatever you heard or whatever you listened to in your own requirement. Again, this is just verbal communication tips. Eliminate noise and get a lot of feedback from the students. Give very positive body signals. Speak very slowly. Rephrase or repeat your sentences if required, especially the ones that are most where you want to lay emphasis on. Never talk denigrating or trying to uh, diminish somebody's interest or lack of interest, or for that matter, lack of understanding. These are something extremely important as far as the role and responsibilities of faculties are concerned. Listen, be careful, I mean, be very patient as to a person who is not able to cope up with the complexities of the subject that you're trying to communicate. So these are again some things we all listen to, we all adhere to or try to adhere to, but in the end of the day, it's always good to have a self-check on these kind of things if you were to make an effective communication in your workplace as a faculty. Improving body language, okay, keep appropriate distance. We don't have to, post-COVID or at least that has already become a cultural, socio-cultural phenomenon. We are no longer required to be told to maintain, and of course, how you make physical contact, how you handshake, how you take care of your appearance, how people may be conning you or trying to take advantage or trying to give you false importance. As faculty, you're all supposed to know these kind of, I'm sure that you already know these kind of things, but these are some of the tips for keeping it real, as they say. And we've already mentioned about maintaining eye contact, because it kind of dissuades another person from trying to take advantage of a situation when he or she is trying to tally up to a faculty or trying to earn. We've all done that in our lives, of course, but keeping it real, by the phrase that I'm using, keeping it real is basically trying to give the message that if everybody does what they're expected to do, the faculty would respond in a very fair way. In such a case, there would be no requirement to try and tally up or butter up, whatever phrase you want to use, to the faculty. So that's why the distance between, a healthy distance between what the faculty's position is and the scholar or students is also essential in keeping that distance and keeping that appropriateness to for giving the message that this is all about what we are supposed to do and what they are supposed to do. And if that is done to the best of their ability, then the faculty will take care of it in a very fair and patient manner. So we come to the conclusion of the first part, that is for all effective communication skills, we need to be able to handle all the challenges in the diverse workplaces we have, both within our regions and if we also go across the region. So that is the first part. The second part is slightly larger, slightly more complex, and that is soft skills. Now, soft skills are basically little more than the language itself. Okay, soft skills are the entire effort that includes everything, including the language, including your ability, including your nature, your trait, your personality, your behavior, everything that goes into, in any kind of activity where you are dealing with an individual or a group of individuals, then in that case, soft skills come into play. So language was just, or the communication skill was just one part of the soft skills. This is a slightly larger ambit of traits, nature, practice, habits, personality, attitude, and behavior that goes on to, conveying um, the intent of whatever you are trying to do in any kind of activity. Soft skills are never formal or technical. All right, even though there is a full, and we're going to go through some of those uh, uh, aspects of how you improve or work on your soft skill. They are not formal, so understand this, that this is in communication. Of course, we still have some structure. There is a deep-rooted psychological background into achieving or bringing out the aspects that were brought out in the previous slide. But in soft skills, it's the major point that I'm trying to make here is how pleasing or how positive you want to be in the kind of way, in the way you want to express yourself completely, not just by the communication skills, but also by other traits, other habits, other attitudes, everything that goes on to making your personality. It should appear as very, very positive. And then when that happens, it is I wouldn't use the word assume, but it is already known, and everybody knows that then success in the work field that you're doing, it gets what you call easier to achieve. But then this is not technical knowledge, this is not formal, so there is no checklist on this thing. Okay. So what are the skills that include in soft skills? We have already covered oral and written communication skills. We'll go to the second one, which is the critical thinking ability. There is a talk tomorrow, I think, where I'm speaking on this thing, but more to be covered there. But here it's very self-explanatory that you should be able to do critical thinking without creating any bias. I'm again borrowing from tomorrow's class, where bias and prejudice have to be removed as much as possible from the ability to do critical thinking. We cover that, how it's done in another class, probably scheduled for tomorrow. How resourceful you are. We always hear this word that Indians have this unique ability to do jugaad. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that word, but that is nothing but a local expression of resourcefulness. What you use, what is available to you, and you come up in using those available elements or aspects or whatever features you may have in solving a particular kind of problem. That is also a skill set that is extremely important where soft skills are concerned. And of course, the ability to work productively with a team. So these are some of the soft skills that one needs to uh, uh, acquire while you are actually trying to gain success in life or career or your workplace or your work field or your subject or whatever intent and interest that you have that you're trying to do. It is the ability required and expected from people for finding either a suitable job or maintaining the job that you have, and then thus improving upon it in your career skills. A little more in the importance of soft skills. Uh, this I started with when you apply them when you are dealing with another person or group of people as such. So it's all about how your interpersonal relations are. And I'm only focusing here on the workplace. Okay, so this is all about professional interpersonal association that you have with your faculties, with your scholars and students, and with your administrative staff, and with your seniors, etc., who are all relative to how you improve in your career and in your workplace, and everything related to it. It is extremely important that you are able to take appropriate decisions that help you or assist you in your advancement of your career. And this is where also soft skills come into play. We'll see in the future, some of the slides that are about to come as to how that kind of occurs or happens. To be able to communicate effectively, we already covered the whole section of communication skills, so I'm not going to go again into that. And to have an overall good impression and which assists you in being the guy or the lady who is then always considered as the best candidate for improvement in career. So of course, we've already covered communication skill as one of the cornerstones, because the moment you're talking about interaction, you're talking about communication skills. Now, we covered communication skills in the periphery a little bit more detail. If you just look at the three examples that we already covered in one of the previous slides, I'm not going to go too deep into explaining how this is. This works, but you all know. But just to make a distinction and a little bit of more detail, presentation, audience awareness, critical listening, body language, all of this is there. In written, it is all about academic writing, revision, editing, critical reading, and presentation of data. In non-verbal, your audience is basically how your audience awareness is affected, how your personal presentation is affected, and how you use your body language for this. And all these three sets then are able to effectively be called as the communication skills that you may have. So in this case, of course, you can always use this as a checklist if you're one of those people who actually want or like to give audience presentations. And when I say audience presentations, I don't mean within the confines of the institutions that you are already working in, but you are more interested in giving a much larger type or scope of audience, which is mostly or usually other than your own home institutions. And if you are that kind of a person, or if you have that kind of an aspiration, I would even go to the extent of recommending a training for proper communication skills, which I have tried to cover as much as possible within the scope of today's talk. So a little more on the elementary definition, which we already covered, that it is extremely essential that human beings communicate with others in the most effective way. And then, of course, it is also expressed in the way how we are, of course, these are single simplistic lines to convey certain messages. We're not going into the definition of what is called as a person who is educated or not educated. We're not going to get into the primitive, what appears educated or not uneducated as such. It has nothing to do with the language that you're using. Whatever I'm saying is not to, express the ability of one language. I'm using English, but the same things that I have expressed as far as effective communication skills are concerned, or effective communication skills as part of the soft skills are concerned, can be done and should be done in any language that you are adept at or comfortable with. Please do not misunderstand that this is only in English or anglicized way of better soft skills or better communication skills that is being talked about here. No, every aspect of today's presentation is also available in the regional language that you are most comfortable in. So that is a hallmark of that's how education or educated person is not somebody who comes from one particular background or one particular linguistic skill set. So definitely I'm not adhering or supporting just the use of English. So if you're comfortable in whichever language that you are supposed to partake your classes with, I am referring to that language. And of course, then there are these that take care of as far as the oral, written, and non-verbal part of the communication requirements are supposed to be met. So again, a little bit good communication within the structure of soft skill. How do you define? Now, I said you can't have a checklist, of course. How do we actually define? We define, how do we already, as faculty, we are already tuned into or trained into deciding the way we are going to teach or deliver the lectures based on the kind of the audience we have or based on the kind of the students we have. When we go out to give a talk, we also base it according to the kind of audience that will be there. What else needs to also be part of good communication during a talk or during a lecture or during delivery of any kind of academic exercise requires some of the elements, for example, coordination. So as a practice, I'm sure all of you already do it. When there is a new class that needs to be started, we are already sending them some amount of reading material that is required, but not so much that we overburden them with the workload kind of a thing. So they just need to know certain things and then we build on it while we are teaching it. This is slightly more detailed. I'm just covering the same communication skills that we covered it in the earlier part, but though this is more to do with the process of how we do it. I'm sure all of us do this already, so I'm just going to treat this as more of a refresher. So just bear with me for a few slides. Then we already decide who needs the information, and then we kind of decide the level at which this information will be dissipated. Confirmation is on our part as faculty, so that we know that the requirements are all met. The timelines also, we don't jump to the 10th chapter. I mean, that's a given. We go in a chronological fashion, whether the level, I mean, depending on the level of the subject at hand and its complication as we start from this, I mean, from the introductory part to the advanced levels, etc. And of course, we need to keep or maintain the accuracy of the kind of message that we may be trying to deliver. So how does then soft skills help us achieve the goals of career that we have? Now, this at the highest level entwines into what you do at a day-to-day level. Supposing you are somebody who is having a communication problem with an administration block, with another faculty block, and I'm not taking individuals as the example here, I'm taking blocks. By that I mean a particular group of people, irrespective of what the belief system is, irrespective of the confusion that may have occurred, irrespective of what the miscommunication or misunderstanding that has happened. At the end of the day, when you're looking for your promotion, when you're looking for your stability and career growth, all these aspects, if they are resolved, all these conflicting aspects, if they are resolved, they will have a very positive or a very strong positive outcome in achieving your higher goals. What happens is when we go through the mundane day-to-day life, we get bogged down with the kind of interpersonal association and the problems related to that we have with our colleagues or with, like I keep repeating, I'm for the lack of better example, I keep saying administration, I keep saying some other departments, etc., individuals or group of individuals as such. The objective cannot be to sustain a conflict. The objective cannot be to sustain our work environment in such a way that reason for conflict, that reason for misunderstanding, or that reason for miscommunication continues over a long period of time. The objective has to be that you somehow overcome the challenge. Now, I am not going to preach how you overcome it. I have done things which somebody might say is not appropriate or should not be done, or that's too high-nosed, or that you said sorry to the wrong person. Irrespective of how you wedge your requirement in achieving your higher goal, if you keep the higher goal as your major objective in life, it will still take time for you to practice how you get out of your ego tussles. With your permission, with the audience's permission, I'm using these informal words. Or you've had a tussle with hopefully not with a colleague or a faculty, hopefully not with somebody who is a senior person. And it does not matter how you mend those problems. Those problems will not turn from iron to gold. So what do you do? Why do you need to use soft skills? Why are we expanding the base from communication skills to soft skills? Is that you use all that is given to you in your person, in the armor of your personality, to make sure that that issue gets resolved. Getting resolved does not mean that the problem that you have with the faculty or with the colleague or with the administration or with some other department, that completely converts into a friendly situation. Or today they were, I don't want to use the word because we are in an academic group. So I don't want to use the word enemy. So I'll say whatever was your adversary, it's not necessary that that adversary or that person with whom or persons with whom you have this kind of a problem or conflict with will become your best friends the next day. But what is extremely important and essential for all of us to, in our attempt to grow in our careers, in our aims and roles and responsibilities that we want to as a faculty, is that you eliminate or at least neutralize that problem, that conflict that exists within your working environment in many ways that I will not be able to go into detail right now, but in any way that you deem fit and possible, so that at least if it doesn't become negative to positive, at least it becomes a zero in the balance sheet. Once you achieve that zero, at least it will not have any negative indices. It may not have positive. You already have, I'm sure you already have, all of you and all of, including me, have positive associations with a lot of our groups and peers and different blocks of people that we associate with. That will that will be in any ways help us in our journey or in our process of what you call career or excuse me, working environment, etc. But whatever is negative, at least try to make the negative come back to neutral or reduce to zero, if not in positive. And in achieving this very high goal, I'm sorry, I kind of diverted here a little bit, but the whole issue of actually using communication skills and using soft skills is actually to keep your work environment and your presence in that environment as amicable and as positive as possible. I think you had a lecture 2 days back on how a positive work culture is created in the workplace a couple of days ago. So I'm not going to add too much to this thing, but the whole idea here also, whether you're doing communication skills or whether using the whole gamut of soft skills, it is to actually be able uh, to achieve your goals, and move towards your larger goals, rather than just solve on a day-to-day basis. It invariably solves on a day-to-day basis if you have a very friendly, positive. I'm talking from experience here. Again, permit me to please bring. I'm not going to say the name, but there is an individual we are all in my working environment that we know of about, and I had the privilege of working with him for a few days, uh, uh, going to his university and etc. And the kind of uh, positivity or the kind of attitude or the kind of behavior that that person exuded during those 5 days is very reflective of the kind of common impression people in my workplace have about this person. And it is extremely important. I'm pretty, if I were to say my age, it'll be a little embarrassing, but I'm pretty sure that there is that we are all trying to be impressive, in the way we deal with our colleagues, our peers, our seniors. We are always trying to do something or publish something or win an award. Or the objective actually is never to win an award. The objective actually is to be recognized as a person who has been able to achieve something in life. If you see it a little more subconsciously, that is what drives. Some people drive it too far and become very ambitious, which is nothing wrong. It's each to his own. But the reason we want to get awarded or rewarded, or the reason we want to become popular or famous in our academic circles, the reason why we sometimes even get competitive is not because we are running for a medal or that award, or it is actually because we want to be recognized as people who have achieved something in our own workplaces and our work life, etc. That is what drives the everything else that follows, whether it's a medal, whether it is the award or the publication or any other honor that we receive, is just the currency of this drive to you know be recognized as somebody who has been able to achieve something. You know, that recognition is extremely important and a driving and a motivation for many of us. And we treat it differently, some of us a little more stringently, some of us a little more easy, but at the end of the time, it is all about being recognized as people who have been able to achieve. So to be able to do that, you can always publish a paper, very famous paper. Some of your paper may come out in some big journal. You know, Nature may publish something, or some other equivalent journal. You get famous, you get popular. But the journey doesn't end there. The journey starts when you become famous because you published in a very high place, or you published a book, or you became famous, you won an award. Your actual challenges of your interpersonal skills and all that we are trying to cover today actually start there, because that's when you get invited to other places. That's when you get into collaboration with other researchers. That's when you go to other universities and other places where you are then tested on the kind of person and how you communicate, etc. And we are back to square one, how your soft skills and some communication skills are there. These are the two kinds of expressions you may have amongst many. Oh, he was or she was a great publisher, made a great paper, but the person was very no, not that interesting, or the person tikni, and that kind of a thing comes. And the other part comes is what a paper and what a personality. So you get impressed not with just the publication that has happened or some award that has happened, but you are also impressed when you meet that person. That yeah, whatever, he or she, doesn't matter here. But that's how the journey starts. And if you want to achieve that, it doesn't end at the award or the publication. It actually starts there. And that is why soft skills, communication skills become an extremely what you call essential element to reach these kind of stages. I hope I didn't get carried away too much, because I was just trying to make a point here. Now we come to something extremely important, which is known as the body language. I wish I was in front of the audience. Even if I started my camera, I don't think I would be able to stand up and show certain things that I was privileged to have seen during the time that I was learning how these things matter. And I used to think it doesn't. But from experience, and I leave this to the audience whether they want to trust me on this or not, is that body language matters immensely. Okay, so the next time you shake hands, next time you go to a podium where you're delivering a lecture, next time when you're taking a class, please, I know it's 365 a days, and we hopefully will live long enough for 10, 20 years of our career, etc. So that's a lot many days. And that is why I keep repeating myself. If it becomes a habit, then it is not an effort. It is only an effort if you don't have it as a habit, is that you do certain things which that person I was referring to, who exudes this kind of positivity, is not because he is anything special. It's just that he does these mundane things at all times, and he doesn't even feel the effort. This reference that I was trying to give you is because he does it on a natural basis. For all of us who can do, even for somebody like me who's giving a talk on this topic, it was a huge transformation from what the way I used to think, that I knew certain things, and after my so-called training in soft skills and communication skills, which I was very reluctant at that time to take, because I thought I knew it all, and I thought, what can somebody teach me in English? What can somebody teach me? But then I was so wrong in the course, and ever since that time, I have been extremely humble in actually trying to learn from, including my students at some times where I find that some of them may have something very good as far as soft skills go. So I am not not somebody who is just, restricting myself to have come to this stage, so I can't do anymore. I will not learn anymore. I know everything kind of. I try to stay away from it because I had the learning experience of actually going from transforming from a time when I thought something as simple as English was, and I was pretty old already. I had already finished my PhD when I went through this thing. So there was this self-realization, and I'm again leaving you all to your own choices of whether you want to think whichever way you want to think. If you are already practicing, again, thumbs up, kudos to all of you. If you are not, then I can only request that you pay a little attention, if possible, into bringing these skill sets into your day-to-day life interactions with your students, scholars, colleagues, peers, and everybody else around. So, body language. Back to the topic. Posture matters. Posture matters a lot, and there were a lot of pictures that I wanted to pick up, but I will just leave it at referencing this thing. There's one or two slides where I will show you how a posture matters, but then you can go into the whole, excuse me, the subject of how posture is can make something, the way you express yourself or the way you are seen or received by an audience, how posture matters. There's a whole lot of literature available on it. If you just Google it also, you'll actually, you may not get everything, but you'll get most of it in the best ways possible. You have the head motion, which we all do, whether we are nodding and saying yes or agreeing to something, or where we are being completely negative or negating a topic. So especially Indians, we have this we have been caricatured in certain times in certain other places that we move our head mostly when we are talking. It's not the case, but that's how it is seen in some caricaturing in some places. But yes, nodding is extremely important, whether you're showing agreement or whether you're showing disagreement. Your facial expressions tell everything. Excuse me. We all know that from childhood, we kind of get trained to read the kind of facial expressions that uh, either as children or our children. I mean, whichever way you look, you will always be able to read facial expressions to something very, very innate and something very natural to the human, the whole process of being human, being social, and being, mother, wife, friend, brother, sister, whatever, in any association, the facial expression plays a lot. But what happens is we don't realize that the facial expressions have a very different effect when we are in our workplace. And that kind of sometimes misleads people into taking decisions or taking impressions based on which they take decisions, which may hurt or harm us in our career or our faculty, or even something which is your first reaction to something which is being offered to you. Say, supposing you are being offered to organize a training program, and your first reaction, you said nothing, but you showed it with your facial expression that you were not interested. You didn't mean it, but that was how it was. You may have shown a reluctance, which is because you were tired at that moment. In reality, you would love to organize or host a training mission in your campus, but that one small fleeting expression that you were not may give somebody else the impression that you are actually not interested. By the time you go and you explain, no, I am interested, the things and the decisions have already been taken. So another thing that happens very commonly to our lives or in our working environment is how we are perceived based on the kind of facial expressions we have. It's also extremely important, although I can't see all your faces here during this talk, that it gives us the perception of what the audiences, or your scholars or students are feeling about. There is not much you can do if it is not as positive as you may have intended it, or as you may have perceived it, or wanting, or may have aspired it to be. But there's always an effort from the faculty, or there has to be always an effort from the faculty to see to it that majority, at least their facial expressions, so intend to learn, or a kind of satisfaction that they've learned whatever the class or their course was about. Eye contact keeps repeating itself. So I'm not going to repeat that. It is extremely important that you maintain eye contact. Trust me, if you don't practice it, There are so many times that this becomes an effort, and then it also becomes something which we don't do, especially when you are. It starts very simply at our very common space, social circle. Okay, because you take things for granted, because you know that's your best friend, because that's your close associate or an acquaintance. But in many ways, that is not the right way to actually communicate. We've already covered that, so I'm not going to cover that. And then gestures, any kind of gestures that are, indicate whether it is positive or negative, will also have a different connotation of how it is taken. Very simple. Body language is nothing but non-verbal. We covered 3 parts, right? So the third part is non-verbal communication, which is of course body language. You don't speak anything, but your body tells everything that is on the in your mind when you're expressing something, or vice versa, when the other person is expressing his or her interest or disinterest in what you're talking about, is also available through excuse me, the body language that is used. So most of us, again, we already know what kinds of things the body language kind of it uses. So whether there is laughing, whether there is pauses or stress on certain words, whether you are slouching, shows a lack of interest in this case, untidiness in appearance, also lack of interest, or very busy schedule, or tiredness, or disinterest. Head movements we've already covered is either in approval or disapproval. Hand movements we know about confirmation, thumbs up. All use hand movements to stop a car, etc. Even the last of gives us the indication. I'm not talking when the person wants to raise a hand and ask a question. No, this is all about how convincing you are while you're talking. Now there was a time, and we'll see in another slide, where body language also depends on how your hands are kept, how your head is positioned as to being open or closed. There was a long time, and even today in some places, where this distinction is not made as far as our system is concerned in many places, for that matter. But as you know, as improvements happen all around, progress, development happens all around, we come to know that there is a what you call there is an effect that hand movements also have as far as the effect of what we have on the audience, or what the audience has an effect on us, is interpretable. You can interpret that kind of eye movements, and that's a very wrong example. Winking is not just okay. I took the slide from an existing presentation, so ignore that. But eye movements also indicate something as simple as if everybody is sleeping, then it is indicative of a certain thing. Okay, so needless to expand on that, but if you are talking to somebody and somebody is being very prevalent with the eye movements, that means that person is not at peace or is feeling very uncomfortable to speak with you at that moment. And that also happens within the faculty-student conversation or communication, especially if you're reprimanding somebody, or if you're asking an explanation for something which should or should not have been done. Again, facial expressions we've already contacted. so all of these aspects, which and much more, that actually form the non-verbal language, communication language, that we all adhere to from our childhood, and they're all, as Indians, we are all already tuned and trained into this thing from our own homes, etc., are actually a part of or become a part of our. I know I said soft skills don't have a formal structure, etc., but then this translates from whatever we learned at our home while growing up in our neighborhood into the workplace as well. And most of the times we actually understand it, that our friend, our colleague is not interested in something you're talking about, or your class is not interested in something you're talking about, or you're not interested in receiving something from somebody else is trying to communicate. And such times, what can you do? So the whole element of the positive expression of body language that I kind of mentioned with regards to a colleague of mine and how everybody has that impression. And when I went and found that impression to exist, is exactly what I'm trying to convey here. That there are certain do's and don'ts that you can do to, and I'm just giving a small example here. I just covered all of it in the previous slide, but here. So this is just a simple way. There are, like I said, there are so many ways of how you sit, what your posture is, how you're nodding, how you're nodding in appreciation. If the nodding in appreciation is happening with the person who's on the stage giving a lecture or a talk, and there is an eye contact, the person who's giving the talk immediately identifies himself or herself to this particular person in the audience. Okay, so that happens especially when there is a complete support or a very strong support from the audience towards the person who is speaking. Likewise, the person who is speaking can also understand that there is a big disagreement between what you call the audience and what he or she is speaking, all of which is communicated right live while this kind of activity is going on stage, off stage, etc. So we also need to be open about certain of these things when we take our classes or when we take our what you call when we deliver our lectures or presentations, etc. This is just merely one example to showcase how body language can actually have a different effect. So on the right hand side, you can see the person with open hands is using hands and it is open and the left is closed. This is slightly contentious because in certain societies, using or expressing too much of your thoughts and words using hands is not considered polite. All right. So you have to understand what best works in your situation. I am going with the one that I have been trained in, and I'll rather use it as an extension of the expression that I'm trying to make. So I do use my hands, but not when I'm standing in front of a DS, okay, or when I'm giving or delivering a lecture. That is not when it is an open stage and only the audience is in front of me. Of course, then I will be able to use the hands. It's also like we are trained to give very formal interviews in our lives where we don't use our hands, as we are most of us are actually tuned to not using our hands because that shows an expression or lack of conviction of what we are talking about, our knowledge level, etc. So that is a slightly contentious and debatable issue, but an upright posture. Let's say when you're teaching a class, you have the complete freedom because you don't have a dais in front of you or a stand in front of you. You just have the class in front of you. And in such cases, if you do use hands as an extension of your expression or of your communication, it does enhance the effectiveness of what you're trying to teach or communicate at that time. It also shows a level of interest and intent of the speaker. So there's an emotional connection there. So body language does express that. And for the lack of my presence there in front of you, I would have done a 20-second difference between how I can have two kinds of body languages, where one is what exudes, positivity and best of the expression and openness, and how the other, though nothing wrong with it, would immediately lull the audience into some kind of disinterest or a certain degree of lack of interest thereof. So it matters how you come to the screen and how I mean you come in front of your audience, that is, and you have. And the same then applies to how you meet your friends, how you greet your friends in the morning. Usually when we meet our friends, it's a very positive vibe that we say, and that friend could be 10 years, 20 years old association to yourself. And the way we still kind of have that, that energy to greet him or to meet him, if you understand the point I'm trying to make here, it's the same expression that you actually should be bringing to the class or to a stage when you are trying to express or communicate yourself. Written communication skills evaluates a person's proficiency. So, spelling, grammar, etc. So, as less an error, the better. Good visual presentation using graphics, color balance, design layout adds a lot to the whole effort. Always use visuals as much as possible. I started by saying a picture is worth 1,000 words. Presentation skills, we all do that, so we are all experts in our own ways. But there are steps into, and I'm sure we all do that, but let's just recap it in short. We require to plan, we prepare, and we deliver the message according to the audience, and we tune it according to the best way we think is best for the audience, that is the type of audience that is there. Making a formal speech is one form of presentation, but then it depends on the subject at hand, and you may go from formal to informal. Just to generalize it, success in life depends on presenting the ideas in appropriate manners. Please look at the audience and speak in natural conversational voice. Appropriate voice will make the presentation effective and interesting. Ask for feedback from your audience about presentation and change accordingly. Like I said, I do it in my class. I immediately, in the middle of the class, I try to ask a question, but I think the audience here has already been very active because I've been receiving some good and positive comments somewhere in the between. Please adhere to as much as possible to teamwork in our line, especially, but in any line of work that we all do. This is something which is very generally advocated, but in our line, because we are handling a mass of students and not one individual or a few individuals, our work is always complementary to each other, even if it is not from the same subject. So does the success and the name and the good name and the goodwill that our institutions generate largely depends on the effectiveness of teamwork that we all do, rather than just individual, contributions as such. Maintain your professional ethics. Of course, focus on put your entire intent and interest into this kind of work that we all do. Okay. Interpersonal skills. We discussed interpersonal skills. We also discussed how your body language will kind of expression and interpersonal skills that you are to exhibit. And so keep away from all that is negative. Keep away from all that is rebellious or anger or those kind of things. But any of the other than the red in the circle is always welcome. Whether you are, happy, excited. These are some of the things which are something to be. We need to aspire. Another thing which is extremely time management. This is a soft skill, by the way. So we all do that. We all do that in several ways. There is no way that we can escape it. But important work is. I'm sorry about the spelling mistake there. I think stress management. So again, a part of soft skills. This is all required for your enhancement in your workplace and in improving what you are intending to do. Of course, given some examples, but that is hardly the way you all decide how you are supposed to go through. Just part of this is the effectiveness of how you communicate is part of the soft skills set itself. And finally, if you apply all these things, you develop leadership skills. So whether you're using good, effective communication or whether you're using other elements and aspects of soft skills, it eventually leads your, it develops your leadership values and skills. Some things which make a difference is that always be willing to learn new things, always accept responsibility for yourself and your actions, look at problems and challenges, and be always grateful for whatever you have received in form of the different positives that you have already in life, rather than looking at from a complainant's point of view. So develop mental power, develop your skill set, develop always ingrain motivation, take responsibility, work with the teamwork, always develop communication, have competence, and always look for support for your ideas and give support to others in their ideas, etc. A very important line with which I would like to end today's talk is that men make history, history does not make men. So it's not the other way around. In periods where there is no leadership, society stands still. Progress occurs when courageous and skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better. So in the end, everything that I kind of started with, whether it was communication skills and then leading up to a larger set of skills with soft skills, and then eventually delivering a position or to all of you where you learn and exhibit leadership skills. Finally, it all culminates into your contributions to your society, to our society. I'm sorry, and I mean in our own spaces wherever we are, and thus improving our country. You know, one at a time, step by step. Thank you so much. And that is where I shall end my presentation today. I would request somebody from the host to take over the proceedings.
Thank you, sir. May I request the participants to write the questions into a chat box if there are. Okay. Sir, looking at the chats, what I can see is that the lecture is highly appreciated by the participants. And thank you for dealing with the important criteria of leadership, that is communication and soft skills. You have covered almost all aspects through which the interaction, either it is written or verbal, will become positive, and that will really impact the work culture in the institutes. So thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us, and looking forward for tomorrow's session again. Thank you, Amit, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to it too. Thank you.